Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Braeden Barber, and I decided that my SRP would be on how various playing surfaces affect the technical performance of soccer players. Before we start, here are some facts about me. My name is Braeden Barber. I currently attend Tunstall High School, and after I graduate, I plan on attending the University of Richmond School of Arts and Sciences to major in chemistry. So why did I decide to conduct my project on this topic? As of today, I've played soccer for about 12 years now. Throughout my years of playing the sport, I've played on fields that look like they could have been used as cow pastures. While playing on these fields, I found it more difficult to perform tasks that I could easily do on other fields, like simply completing a pass. This made me think, can it be proven that the quality of a soccer field has a general effect on the way soccer athletes perform? The importance of this topic stems from the coaches and players of the game of soccer. The results obtained from the study can be used by coaches in order to determine what fields their players should practice on to better prepare them for future games. They can be used by players to determine if they should adjust how they usually play so that they can perform best on different fields in their futures. The ways in which the coaches and players can use results of this study will allow teams to increase their odds of winning their future season games. Through my research, I was able to identify 3 types of performance categories, which were technical, tactical, and physical. Previous literature has tested the effects of various environmental conditions on technical, tactical, and physical performances. There is a gap in the literature pertaining to the quality of a soccer field and how it affects any of these 3 categories, which is what drove me to conduct my study. Due to its simplicity and reliability, I chose to study technical performance. Technical performance was measured by how many times a player touched the ball during an entire soccer match. The total amount of touches were divided into 3 categories, which were passes, dribbles, and ball possessions. Dribbles refer to how many times a player touched the ball without passing it or shooting it, and ball possessions refer to how many times a player turned over the ball to the other team via a pass or simply running with the ball. One factor that was found to influence these 3 categories is the formation that the team was using during the game. It was found that almost all players perform technical abilities best under formations that have the most amount of players near the goal and the least amount of players farthest from the goal. An example of this is the 5-4-1 formation depicted by this graph. It is important to note that formations are read by the number of players in front of the goal and moves up the field through each section of players on the field. Based on this information, I derived the formation that I will be using in my study, which is a 2-2-1 formation. It accounts for all 5 players on each team in my study and uses the same concept of having the most amount of players near the goal and the least amount of players farthest from the goal. When evaluating the quality of soccer fields, it's important to understand that turf fields have more specific requirements in order to possess a higher quality. The material that makes up turf fields should have little to no seams, and it should be proven resistant to physical damage throughout time. If there are lots of seams in the material, then there is a greater chance for the stitching of those seams to come undone, which will create permanent holes in the field. A turf field should also be installed with a proper drainage system so that during extreme weather conditions, water will not get clogged under the field and cause permanent damage to the material. Regarding field quality for all soccer fields, ball-to-surface measurements were used to determine how well the field was suited to support match play. Ball-to-surface measurements refer to how far the ball is able to roll after it is kicked and how high it is able to bounce after hitting the ground. The higher these values are, the better the quality of the field, because it indicates that the ball is able to travel efficiently after it is kicked. The question that I aim to answer through my study is, how does the quality of a soccer field affect the technical performance capabilities of soccer players? I hypothesized that the surface quality of a soccer field would affect the player's ability to perform technical skills. The null hypothesis would be that with various surface qualities, the player's ability to perform technical skills would not change. As for the variables of my study, my only independent variable was the quality of the field that my participants played on. These fields consisted of a typical quality grass field, a poor quality grass field, and a high quality turf field. The amount of passes, dribbles, and turnovers between each player were evaluated as the dependent variables based on this change of quality. My control variable is the typical quality grass field due to its higher recurrence compared to turf fields and bad quality grass fields. For all tests, a 2-2-1 formation was used for each team, and all teams played on the same size field with the same type of ball for 6 minutes. Prior to testing, I first had to obtain consent from the parents of my participants. After I obtained consent, I gathered my materials, which consisted of soccer codes used to set up the perimeter of the small-sided fields, a tripod used to film each game during each testing session, a soccer ball, a clipboard and pen for participants to sign in and out of each session, and a ruler and meter stick that were used to measure the quality of the field prior to the start of my testing. My sample consisted of 30 soccer players who all had at least 2 years of experience playing soccer. Before my testing began, I went to each individual soccer field and measured its quality. The first step behind this was by passing the ball at equal accelerations on each field and measuring how far it rolled with a meter stick. The second step was measuring the height that the ball bounced after being dropped from the same height on each individual field. Next, I used a random name generator to assign specific days to every 10 players out of the 30 players total, meaning I would have 3 testing sessions. For each set of 10 players assigned to each day, I used the same random name generator to split up those 10 players into 2 teams of 5 players. On the days of testing and prior to the arrival of my participants, I set up the small-sided field using my soccer cones. Each small-sided field setup on the 3 fields was 30 yards by 15 yards. After setting up the small-sided field, I set up my tripod with my phone attached in a location where the camera could pick up the entire area of the field. The video recordings were used to collect my data. After I prepared the field and set up the tripod, my participants signed in upon their arrival. All of my participants ran through a 10-minute warm-up consisting of the same stretches across all the days of testing. Players were then split into their teams and began to play the small-sided games. The small-sided games were played under the same rules as if it were a normal soccer game played on a normal-sized field. After the days of testing, I rewatched the recordings of each session and counted the number of dribbles, passes, and turnovers that each player had on each individual field. I then averaged these values together for each individual field. If the means of dribbles and passes were high and the mean of turnovers was low, then the players performed technical skills well on that type of field. However, if the means of dribbles and passes were low and the mean of turnovers was high, then the players had the most difficulty performing technical skills on that type of field. I then conducted my statistical analysis to determine if there were statistical differences in my data. For my statistical test, I used a one-way ANOVA for each of my variables. I used this test in order to compare the sample means between each variable and determine whether or not there were statistical differences between the means. At the significance level of 0.05, the null hypothesis was not rejected according to my passes variable with a p-value of 0.11. However, my dribbles and turnovers variables rejected the null hypothesis with p-values of 0.047 for dribbles and 0.002 for turnovers. This bar graph presents my data regarding the quality of the 3 fields that I used. It is evident that the turf field possesses the highest quality out of the 3 fields because the ball traveled the furthest and bounced the highest. Based on these measurements, we can conclude that the soccer ball had the best ability to travel after it was kicked on the turf field. This bar graph shows the mean values for passes, dribbles, and turnovers between the 3 types of fields. We can see that the highest means for passes and dribbles were produced by the turf field, along with the lowest mean of turnovers. The good quality grass field produced the second highest means for passes and dribbles, along with the second lowest mean in turnovers. The low quality grass field produced the lowest means in passes and dribbles, as well as the highest mean for turnovers. The means produced between all 3 fields are statistically different in the dribbles variable, as well as the means between the turf field and the good quality grass field in the turnovers variable. There was no statistical difference found between the 3 fields in the passes variable. The high mean in turnovers for the low quality grass field, as well as the low means in dribbles and passes, indicates that my participants had the most difficulty performing technical skills on the low quality grass field. However, with the high means in dribbles and passes, as well as the low mean in turnovers, we can conclude that my participants performed technical skills best on the high quality turf field. At the 0.05 level of significance, there is sufficient evidence to conclude that the quality of a soccer field affects the technical performance capabilities of soccer players. My results indicate that technical abilities will be affected by the type of field that is played on during games or practices. These results can be beneficial in helping players improve technical skills efficiently in order to prepare them for future games. My study identifies a learning variable that research has not commonly studied, which may allow for future research to be done in this field of soccer training. One factor that I think greatly affected the outcome of my study was the amount of holes that were present on the field. This is supported by the results for the low quality grass field, which produced the highest mean in turnovers due to its higher amount of holes that were present on the field. Fatigue may have also played a role in the outcome of my study. As my participants played the small-sided games, their chances of fatigue increased. This means that the results from the 2 grass fields may have been affected by the fact that my participants had already played a game on the turf field prior to the start of those 2 games. In future studies, this can be prevented by allowing participants to have a longer break in between each small-sided game. The results of my study raise new questions for future research, studying the ways in which learning variables affect how soccer athletes perform. Further studies can identify the extent to which field qualities affect performance capabilities. They can also test how field qualities affect the other 2 types of performance categories that were identified through my research, which were tactical and physical. Throughout my research process, I learned that it takes lots of time and effort to ensure that criteria are met and that research is performed ethically. This requires grit from the researcher, which is what I built up throughout my time conducting my study. My SRP reminded me that the best things in life will not come easy, and that it takes determination to accomplish your life goals. I would first like to thank Dr. Jones and Dr. Bocog for allowing me to carry out my study. I thank Ms. Long for assisting me throughout the entire research process, and I thank Ms. Graffett for providing me feedback on how I should approach my statistical analysis. I would like to give a big thanks to my participants for providing me the ability to collect my data. Lastly, I would like to thank the Smith River Sports Complex in Martinsville, Virginia for allowing me to use their fields. Thank you, and I'm now open to any questions. Ms. Davis.
I'm real intrigued by the idea of the field itself affecting how a typical player plays. Have you thought at all about how the quality of a field would affect how a pro, like I see those pros like doing flips in the air and stuff and like catching wild balls. Do you think it would have a difference between the level of player?
So Ms. Davis is asking whether or not I think field quality would affect different types of skill level. I think it definitely would, because I think pros are obviously experienced with, like what you said, like they're doing flips and the sorts of stuff that you don't see with teenagers and youth players. So I think that field quality could definitely affect different aspects of the game for them compared to teenagers or youth players.
What kind of field do you prefer?
Ms. Davis is asking me what kind of field do I prefer. I prefer a turf field because it's smooth, there's no holes, the ball travels easily. It's a lot easier than playing on a grass field that's torn up. Ms. Probst.
You may not have had time to analyze this, but did you see any differences between a player that's predominantly a defender versus an offensive player?
So Ms. Probst is asking me if I had any time to analyze whether or not defenders perform differently than offenders. I didn't have time to study that, but that's definitely something that future research could look into, because that is an interesting
But you
thing
had
to
to
study.
mix up them in your...
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, I did. Ms. Brown.
So I'm thinking about, was it deflate gate or whatever? I don't know enough about a soccer ball. Does a soccer ball lose air? Like, so by the time, did you maybe use the same soccer ball, but do you think there could have been any variation in the air pressure, air in the ball to, like, if it was flat or?
So Ms. Brown is asking me over time as I played the games whether or not I think the amount of air in the ball decreased, which could affect the performance capabilities. I think that definitely could have been a factor, because the ball does lose air over time as you perform with that ball. So I tried to use the same type of ball every single game to ensure that the air pressure was as equal as I could get it for each game. But that definitely could have been a limitation for my study.